The morning mist clung to the river Forth like a shroud, pale and silent, until the thunder of marching boots shattered its calm. On the narrow wooden spine of Stirling Bridge, thousands of English soldiers pressed forward, their armor rattling like a rising storm. And on the far bank, standing alone for a heartbeat longer than any man expected, a tall, broad-shouldered knight watched them come. The Scots behind him held their breath. The English before him did not yet see him. But history would remember this moment, this single night's stand, as the spark that set the bridge ablaze with destiny. His name was William Wallace. And on this day, his decision, his refusal to retreat, his insistence on holding the line, would turn a doomed standoff into one of Scotland's most breathtaking victories.
Scotland in 1297 was a wounded land. King Edward I of England, Longshanks, had marched north the year before, crushing resistance, burning towns, and installing English sheriffs to rule the Scots as conquered subjects. The Scottish nobility was divided, many captured or dead, others forced to swear fealty. Peasants carried the weight of a foreign army on their backs. Taxes, confiscations, forced labor. The land smelled of smoke and defeat. But resistance flickered. Small uprisings appeared in the lowlands, then in the northeast. And in the shadows of the forests and glens, a tall young knight began to carve a legend from the English garrisons he struck at night. Wallace. According to historical records, Wallace was not yet the national icon he would become, but stories of his ferocity spread quickly. Tall as a pine, wielding a great sword as though it were a branch, he inspired those who had lost faith. Meanwhile, another leader rose in the north, Andrew Murray, a noble with both education and battlefield discipline. But fate would make Wallace the dominant figure at Stirling Bridge, not by rank, but by the stand he would take. The English governor of Scotland, John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey, could not ignore the rebellion any longer. He marched north with a large, disciplined army. Heavily armored knights, professional infantry, Welsh archers, and cavalry bred for war. His objective: crush the Scots once and for all. But the geography around Stirling sealed his fate long before he reached the bridge.
Dawn at Stirling, a land of traps. The sun had barely lifted when Wallace stepped onto the crest of the Abbey Craig, a high volcanic outcrop overlooking the river. The air was cold enough to burn the lungs. Below him, the river Forth curved like a silver serpent, its surface broken only by the narrow wooden bridge that spanned it. He studied the terrain with the eyes of a hunter. The bridge was only wide enough for two horsemen to ride side by side. The marshy ground on the English side narrowed their approach. The Scots positioned on the north bank could strike swiftly, then vanish into higher, firmer ground. It was a perfect killing ground if used properly. Behind Wallace, his army, farmers, townsmen, a handful of trained fighters, waited in patient silence. Many had never fought in a real battle. Others had lost brothers and sons in the last year's English campaign and stared across the river with cold fury. Wallace breathed deeply. The scent of damp reeds, the murmur of the river, the distant metallic clatter of English armor. This battlefield would belong not to numbers, but to timing. And Wallace possessed timing like an instinct.
The English arrived, confidence and noise. Across the bridge, the English army glittered beneath the rising sun. Horses snorted clouds of steam, shields gleamed, war banners snapped in the breeze. Sir Hugh Cressingham, the English treasurer of Scotland, impatient and arrogant, demanded an immediate advance. "We will crush them before midday," he shouted, loud enough for even some Scots to hear across the water. But Surrey, tired and aging, hesitated. He ordered breakfast. He sent envoys demanding Scottish surrender. Wallace said only, "Go back and tell them, we are not here to make peace. We are here to win our freedom." The messenger returned pale-faced. Surrey sighed. "Very well. Send them across."
The knight who stood first. Wallace's army stayed hidden behind the curve of the ground near Abbeycraig. From the English perspective, the Scots appeared few in number, just a handful at the river's edge. But then came the moment that would echo through history. When the English vanguard began crossing the narrow bridge, Wallace stepped forward, alone, to the front of the Scottish lines. Several chroniclers recorded Wallace's habit of placing himself where danger was sharpest. On this day, it was more than courage. It was strategy. His lone figure drew English attention. A single knight, standing, tall, refusing to budge. To some English soldiers, he looked like a madman. To many Scots, he looks like a shield they had never asked for but desperately needed. One knight, standing. One knight, deciding the moment. Behind Wallace, Murray whispered to a nearby captain, "He wants them to see only him. He wants them to think we are afraid." It worked. The English vanguard surged faster across the bridge, hungry to claim the honor of capturing the rebel knight who dared to stand before them. What they did not know was that Wallace had turned their confidence into a blade aimed at their own throats.
The trap springs. By late morning, enough English soldiers had crossed the bridge to form a substantial force on the north bank, but not enough to overwhelm the Scots, and far too many to retreat quickly. The bridge behind them clogged with more troops pushing forward. Wallace watched them approach, his hand resting on the pommel of his greatsword. He could hear their breaths, ragged under helmets. He could smell the leather of their bridles and the iron of their mail. Then came the moment. He turned to his men. His voice was calm, almost quiet. "Now." The Scottish ranks surged forward in a wave of steel and fury. Spears bristled, shields slammed, voices erupted into a roar that shook the riverbank. The English vanguard, cramped and disorganized, had no room to form up. Wallace led the charge personally, exploding into the front line with a force that split their formation like fire through dry grass. His sword swung in long, brutal arcs, cleaving helmets, knocking riders from saddles. Each blow seemed to carry not just strength, but a lifetime of pent-up resistance. Behind him, Murray's men wheeled left, cutting the English off from the higher ground. Another group struck right, driving them back toward the river. Pinned, crushed, squeezed by terrain, timing, and one knight's audacity. English soldiers shouted, panicked, "Back! Back across the bridge!" But the bridge was jammed with fresh troops. Chaos turned to disaster. Some English soldiers plunged into the river to escape, weighed down by their armor. Others were trampled by their own horses. The Scottish spearmen advanced relentlessly, their training under Murray turning into a deadly phalanx. Wallace moved through the melee like a hammer through glass. According to records, he fought with ungodly strength, though historians today understand this as battlefield momentum amplified by adrenaline and desperation. Either way, it worked. As the English vanguard collapsed, the remaining troops on the bridge tried to force their way back, but Scottish fighters charged the bridge entrance, hacking at the tightly packed mass of English soldiers trapped on the planks. Wallace himself fought his way to the bridge's edge. From his elevated position on the sloping ground, he bellowed, "Break the bridge!" A group of Scots, prepared beforehand, rushed from the riverbank with axes, striking the wooden supports under the bridge's northern end. The structure shook, cracked, groaned under the weight of hundreds of terrified soldiers. Then,
With a sound like thunder splitting mountains, the bridge collapsed. English soldiers fell screaming into the river. Horses flailed, armor dragged men down into the cold depths of the Forth. It was no longer a battle. It was annihilation. Cressingham himself attempted to flee but was surrounded. According to chroniclers, he was killed in the rout, his arrogance silenced forever on the soil he thought he owned. Wallace stood at the water's edge, drenched in sweat and blood, not all of it his own, breathing in the sharp scent of river air and iron. One stand, one moment, one night whose refusal to step back had destroyed an army.
Surrey, watching helplessly from the south bank, ordered a retreat. He did not attempt another crossing. He fled south, abandoning Stirling, abandoning Scotland. The victory electrified the kingdom. For the first time, the Scots had defeated a major English army. For the first time, hope was stronger than fear. Word of Wallace's stand spread like wildfire across farms, towns, and highland glens. Some stories exaggerated, some romanticized, but at the core lay a profound truth. At Stirling Bridge, it was not just strategy that won the day. It was courage at the right moment, embodied in a single knight whose presence drew the English into a trap they could not escape. Within months, Wallace would be declared Guardian of Scotland. Within a year, he would lead armies deep into England. But Stirling Bridge would forever remain the moment when the course of history turned on one knight's stand.
History often remembers armies, numbers, ranks, strategies. But sometimes a nation pivots on something smaller, something human, a decision, a refusal to retreat. Wallace's stand at Stirling Bridge did more than win a battle. It revived a broken country. It showed a conquered people that freedom was not impossible, merely waiting for bravery bold enough to claim it. And in the mist above the river Forth, if one listens carefully, they say the echoes of that stand still linger. The moment one knight became a shield for his nation. And through that courage turned the tide of history itself.